Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Fellow Rotarians, Mr. Espenshade, I'd like to thank you first of all for inviting me to come out to speak today. Mr. Espenshade and I met a couple of months ago, and in the middle of the conversation we came to the conclusion that both of us had actually studied abroad in Germany and Austria, and instantly came and had an instant bond because of that. Although the generations are different, we both had almost exact same experiences in terms of assimilating into a new culture. The presentation I have today traces an entire year that I spent in Austria as an American student at a foreign university. I was lucky enough to be taken under the wing of some friends of mine there, and I was able to experience some cultural things that I wouldn't have been able to see as just a regular American student. They took me under their wing and kind of took me along, and I just jumped right into their lives. I understand you don't want to just spend your entire lunch break looking at some 20-year-old's pictures of his vacation in Europe for a year. But I assure you I actually did come home with some college credits. I did actually learn a couple of things while I was there. A background about myself, I went to Lancaster Catholic High School, and I live in Mannheim Township. And I went to Millersville University here in Lancaster, so all Lancaster County. When I was in middle school, though, at Mannheim Township Middle School, they required that all of the students pick a foreign language to study in the 7th grade. It's not something very many 7th graders want to do. The options that we had were French, German, and Spanish. And although I know a lot of parents would probably tell their children to study Spanish because of its use, because my family was German, because I live in a German area and that was my interest, I decided to just pick German and start studying it. I was very thankful for it because I grew up to accept the fact that I had this niche interest, and it put me along with only a few other students that actually continued to speak or to study German in middle school and high school. They actually dropped the program when I was a senior in high school because so few students actually signed up for it. Aside from the thrill and experience that any American has when he discovers he can actually learn another language, I discovered I had a talent, whether it was listening to foreign music and imitating the accents that I heard, or whether it was speaking with other friends and just trying to pretend that I could speak more than I actually could. I discovered that it actually worked. And I just enjoyed foreign and European things of that matter. I tried to study in the beginning some Russian and Hungarian, but I didn't hate myself nearly enough to continue with those. So I picked something that was a little easier. But I really should thank, if there are any teachers here, especially language teachers, whether it's English or not, you don't understand how deep of an influence you have on your students until years later. But if any students come with you with an interest in foreign language, there are many people who told me when I was doing this that what are you going to do with German? There's no use to it. Why don't you study something like Chinese or Arabic? I don't use German every day, but my experience is there, and the ability to learn a language is something that it benefits a student in every facet of his professional and academic life going forward. There are a couple of pictures that are missing here that I had put together, but it might just be the way that it was loaded up. But typically when studying abroad, a student does it during his junior year. And at Millersville, we did have a study abroad program in Germany, but I had some friends in Vienna through an international Catholic nonprofit that I was associated with. And typical Viennese, when I told them about it, they had to recommend their own town because it's so much better than everywhere else. And plus, I was able to stay with some friends for the first couple of weeks, so I didn't have to pay nearly as much to take care of that expense. When I was searching around for study abroad programs, I found one through a college in Iowa called Central College, and I signed up for a 6-month program. I had to go to New York City to go get my visa, and I only started with the intention of doing it for 1 semester. Part of that fact was, I was in a long-term relationship with a woman who is now my fiance, and wanted to be back as soon as possible. Once I had found that program, I was very thankful for the fact that I was accepted into it, and they had made all the arrangements for me for the classes that I was going to take that first semester. I worked 3 manual labor jobs that summer, saving up as much money as I could, and finally was able to leave in September of 2014. When I landed in Vienna on the first day, hadn't slept the night before because I was excited, didn't sleep on the plane. I arrived early in the morning, 7 hours ahead, was met by my friend Alexander Chugwell, who was my companion throughout the entire time I was there. He was very excited, and since he was about 6'6", he walked a lot faster than I did. And so he spent the first part of the day running me around the inside of the city, showing me all his favorite spots and things. Very excited, both of us. I never had a phone connection the whole first day. I went the entire evening without a phone connection. And so I had arrived there to stay with these friends my parents had never met in a foreign country, thousands of miles away. And my parents and girlfriend were obviously very worried about that. Swapping stories and think they had just shipped their son away to never be seen again. But thankfully I was able to connect with them again after that evening. I have a funny story connected with it, which my friends will never let down. The first night, as I said, I didn't eat or really have anything to drink for about 24, 48 hours. And my friend ran me around the city, and he took me to a cocktail party in the evening. And I found myself sitting there around all these Austrians I'd never met, speaking a language I'd only heard in the classroom before. Found myself nervously taking sips from my drinks. And the rest of the stories I've only heard secondhand from other people. My first introduction to this American that came there. But soon after I arrived, a couple of weeks after I finally gotten settled and gotten my place, I enrolled in the German course that they had, which was about 4 hours every day for about 6 months. And the university program there, in order to enroll as not as a foreign student, you have to accomplish at least a B2 on the European scale proficiency, which is intermediate advanced. And I only had B1, so I wasn't able to technically do that yet, so I attended these 4-hour classes. There were students from Ukraine, Hungary, Mexico, Poland, and so a lot of us they could only barely speak English, so our only mutual tongue that we had was German. And it forced us all to interact with each other in a language that was foreign to all of us. And if there's one way to make you get better at something, it is to force someone to do it. I learned that very quickly. I was also telling John earlier, the one thing I didn't notice until I got there was people are used to having a certain ability to express themselves in their own native language, whether that's using euphemisms, idioms, and different particles, things of speech. You can usually be pretty nuanced, but I learned that I spoke like a caveman when I first got there because of my limited capabilities. Those soon got much better because I had German every day, and I was able to kind of continue with that. In addition to that one class that I took, students are given the ability to choose, pretty much at liberty, choose which lectures that they attend while at the university. The lectures were about an hour a week and are worth about half as much as a regular college class here in the US. So I attended a couple of those. Some of them were in English, some of them were in German. They usually had one test at the end of the semester. So I took other things. Political science was my actual major, so there were things like nuclear proliferation, and they made us read Max Weber and all sorts of awful things like that. Let's see. Here we go. After a couple of weeks when I was there, I was introduced to something that I'd only read about, which some Americans may be only vaguely aware of, which are the Austrian student fraternities. These are much different than what people are used to with frats in the United States. Their image and history, although are very similar from where they come from, they don't their expressions are much different. So the first event that I was invited to was just a regular academic event, similar in the setup to the way this Rotary meeting is, where you had several long tables, obviously called beer tables in German, where they met in this gilded social hall. They were big paintings on the walls of historic scenes from different Austrian historical events, like the Siege of Vienna, and there were pictures of their emperors and things. It was a recognition ceremony for an older member who was a Cistercian monk who had recently gotten an award, or he had gotten his new degree. Now, when you start out, it's very similar to Rotary meeting, where they have a song. And the song that all of them sing in the beginning is called Gaudeamus Igitur, which has the same place in the United States as like Land of Hope and Glory when it comes to graduations, where everybody is coming up and receiving it. It's a very big academic song. It means let us rejoice. It's sung at the beginning, and it comes from a medieval Latin poem dating from the 13th century. Land of Hope and Glory, let's say. The piece praises the academy, it laments the brevity of life, and it tells students to seize the most out of every moment. That was the first event that I was invited to. Let's see, go to a little more of their history. I became very interested in it because so many of my friends there in Austria at the university were in fraternities, and if there's one thing, you just want to go with your friends and belong to a club. Now, the history of these fraternities comes from the early 19th century, late 18th century, around the time of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Now, in order to get some of the history behind it, you have to look at the way universities were first founded in Europe in the Middle Ages. There were only several, and the big places were like in England, northern Italy, and Paris and France. And so the landed nobles, or people that had money, sponsored the best minds in their areas to go to these universities to study. And as a result, because so many of them were gathering from different places in Europe, a lot of them didn't speak the same language besides the academic Latin that they were studying. So as a result, they gathered themselves in their own houses by their place of origin, and these houses were called corps, so that's another term for it. And these organizational structure is very similar to what the Austrian fraternities are at this point. Now, the corps stayed the way that they were as just groups of students from different areas until the 19th century, where the first explicitly German Burschenschaft was founded in 1815 in Jena. Now, it was made up also of students, but a lot of these students were veterans of the Napoleonic Wars. A lot of these veterans had experienced a lot of the politics surrounding the Napoleonic Wars. So they were defending their own country, the idea of Germany or the idea of Italy or France, and these nations, as we understand them now, did not exist. It was more along the lines of your local kingdom, duchy, your local noble. So these students gathered themselves in what was called a Börse, and there it comes from, then that turned into Bursche, which is the name for a student in Germany, and then you also have Burschenschaft, which is just a group of students. Now here we have, I was going to explain two of the pictures. The one on the left is in Heidelberg, which is one of the famous student universities. So that's a student portraits that you usually get done whenever you're first inducted in. And the color of the hats designate which group you are assigned to. And there on the right is an image of the 1848 revolution in Germany, which is the origin of the three-colored German flag as we see now. Now that comes from, and then, there we go. So the Prussian grenadiers who were fighting in Germany against Napoleon at that time, they all had sashes that designated what army unit that they were in, and they were very similar to that. So the army sashes were then worn by the student veterans who put themselves into these groups, which then fought against the political upheaval in the early 19th century. They gathered themselves there. And here's another picture, a depiction of the early 19th century students, and you can see them wearing the sashes with their hats as well, all enjoying themselves. Now, although all of the academic fraternities draw their lineage from the original group, right now in Austria, there are a lot of them are very different. They're taken political overtones and undertones, very different than where they are in the United States. Now, in order to become a member of one of those fraternities, you need to display that you actually fulfill all of the obligations, and they've named those obligations in the original Latin. And they focus mostly on national pride, devotion to democratic principles, and they're also fiercely defensive of intellectual independence of the university's freedom of speech as we understand it in the United States. And here you can see one of the events here depicted is when a senior member is promoted to the next level. If his hat, which I have mine right there, is stuck through with the swords of all of his brethren there. Now, my friend, Alexander, the one that I met originally when I got there, he was a member of, and I told John I'd only say this once, Katholisch-Österreichische Landsmannschaft Josephina zu Wien, which was our group. In order to have membership there, you needed to support religio, so you needed to be a baptized Catholic. You needed to support patria, so you needed to support them and the idea of the Austrian state, so that they had a right to self-determination. Scientia, which means you need to be currently enrolled in an academic program. Amicitia, which is friendship, so you need to be able to go to these events and be an amenable type and be willing to sit and drink beer with your friends. And also monarchia, so you needed to support that the Habsburgs family were the ones who rightfully earned the throne, or who should be the rightful kings of the Habsburg Empire, Austria-Hungary as we understand it. After I had sufficiently proven myself to the older members and was accepted to become a member, they have an induction ceremony at which time you take a new name, a Biername, beer name, obviously. My friend, the one who was 6'6", decided to take the name of Laurin, who was the king of South Tyrol, who also happened to be a dwarf. So he decided to do that. I took Siegfried because I obviously needed to prove myself even further, and he's the hero of the Nibelungenlied. There was a picture there of my friends, but it seems to not have come up. Now we have one of the most foreign traditions to Americans, especially American fraternity members, is the idea of academic fencing, and the way that it was in Germany, even to this day. Now, academic fencing is neither a sport nor a duel where there is some sort of perceived wrong, but there are no winners and no losers. Rather, there are those men who have honorably participated and those who have not. Your accomplishment is measured by your ability to endure pain. And this rite of passage, called Pensurfechten, is only done in the type of fraternity, there's only schlagende fraternities, so not every fraternity does it. I don't have one. I'll explain to you in a minute for the reason why that. Culturally, right now in Germany and Austria, it's perceived with a lot of controversy. There are some people that say that it's utter barbarism, and there are some people who say that it is an old celebration of the martial virtues. After initiation, student members that are members of fighting fraternities, they begin to train in the strict rules and techniques of German fencing. The fencing room, as you see here, this is just another picture. I didn't have one of the place where I was able to visit because it didn't allow pictures. But it's long and it has wood paneling, and when I was there, I saw there was still blood on the walls from it that they didn't clean up. And actually, right at the entrance, they had several pieces of what I think were scalp, or like pieces of hair, nailed to the top with the member's name proudly. There are pictures of men right after the fight with the blood on their face, with the beer in their hands, smiling for the camera. Now, this just might seem very strange to to us. Why are these guys doing this? Why are they slashing each other in the head for no reason? Now, when you do it, you're supported by the entirety of your fraternity, and you fight against a member of another one. And there's no enmity between the two. There's no wrong that has happened, but rather it's just a meeting of the two sides. You gird yourself, your eyes, nose, neck, and striking arm are all protected. So there's no permanent damage or no noses being cut off, things like that. But the face, or so the cheeks and the top of the head are actually left bare, as you can see with this guy here. When the first bout begins, the participant must stand in place and is only allowed to take a certain type of slashing motion. So he's not able to dodge or get out of the way. He has to stand there and either defend or attack. And bravery, as I said earlier, is measured by one's ability to stand and fight. And to take blows and delivering them properly. In order to land a true strike, one that counts, you have to hit the opponent's face or the top of the head. The saber leaves a deep wound, which is immediately attended to by the doctor which is present, sometimes even a member of the fraternity who happened to become a doctor. Care is taken so that there is no extensive damage, but also that a scar remains. A schmiss, as they are immediately recognizable and permanent sign of a membership in the Austrian student fraternities. From the 19th century on, German men proudly earned their schmiss as a visible sign of honor and determination in the face of pain. In addition, the schmiss played an important role in the military traditions of the Franco-Prussian War and onwards. It was very difficult to become an officer or to become promoted if you did not have one. And you may be wondering why I don't have one. That is because in the 19th century, the Catholic Church specifically forbid it, along with things like boxing, because they saw it as extension of deadly dueling and mutilation for absolutely no actual intent. And feeling left out, the Catholic fraternities decided to create their own duel system, which they played with the same rules as the actual mensua, but they just did it with beer. An equally competitive form of drinking, I was there was another picture on the side of this. So one of Vienna's, not as barbaric, one of Vienna's other traditions that they have, and they're very well known for, is the balls. So they have ball season, typically is between right about now until the moment right before Ash Wednesday. Now, there are hundreds of them around the city, and they used to be a controversial thing as a sign of only the upper class and only the aristocracy could participate. But at this point, there are plenty of them. A lot of them have student pricing, and they're very affordable to anybody who actually would like to participate. This one that I have here was taken at the Musikverein, which is, if anybody's ever watched the New Year's celebration in Vienna, that's where the Vienna Philharmonic plays, and that's also where Beethoven had the debut of one of his symphonies. It's one of the most famous music halls there in Vienna. But this was my first introduction to a genuinely white tie event. I'd been to events where I needed to wear a tuxedo before, and seen the president or the White House dinners that they had where they had ambassadors from around the world, but I never thought that I would ever actually be involved in a white tie event. Thankfully, a friend of mine had a similar sized frock to loan me, and I was able to get it. They do a lot of scalping around that time of year and charge a lot of money for it, but I was able to get one for free. They play all the Strauss waltzes that everybody knows, and they play them until about 5, 6 in the morning. At which time you then gather your friends around, you go to the famous Hotel Sacher, and you have yourself breakfast and waddle home. But it was honestly one of the most luxurious evenings of my life, which my parents eagerly told me when I returned is not actually real life. So, actually have to work for a living here. Now, although I took a lot of other trips, which I don't have the time to talk about, going to Eastern Europe and going to Italy, the most formative one that I took outside of living in Vienna was doing the Chartres pilgrimage. Now, this is a pilgrimage that originally started as an extension of the famous Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage, which travels across Europe to Santiago in Spain. Now, this one goes from Notre Dame Cathedral there on the left in Paris, all the way to Chartres Cathedral, which is southwest of the city, about 75 miles. It takes about 3 days. It was claimed to have been completed by Louis XIV, the Sun King, as well as Joan of Arc and other famous people. And there's been a resurgence of interest in it the last 30 years or so in France, and has spread internationally. And there are now about 10 to 15,000 participants at Pentecost each year. The Mass is also done in the traditional Latin Rite, which you can see at a handful of places here in the U.S., which if anybody is here is Catholic might have experienced when they were younger. Here we go. This picture here on the right is of the first Mass that's done about 6:30 in the morning on Friday, and that's one that's done at Notre Dame Cathedral. After the Mass is finished, you immediately begin your walk to the first day's camp, which is about 25 miles outside the city, which that was a little bit of a painful walk, and told me just about how much beer I had had during my experiences there. And here you go. There's lots of young people participate in it from around the world. I had done it right after high school once with an American group, and this time I had done it the second time with some friends from Austria. We had driven up there from Vienna. The land surrounding Paris is mostly suburbs, rolling hills, and farmland. Many of these small towns also have ancient churches that are even older than Magna Carta. So as an American, where here the oldest thing we have is about 300-400 years old, I was able to see real old structures and history. Here we go. A little story there. The French are very vocal about this being a explicitly French event, and the fact that you have lots of Germans and Austrians participating. They always like to have friendly jabs at each other, so they'll sing patriotic hymns from World War I or beforehand. So including my Austrian chapter sang the Kaiser hymn from the 1800s, to which the French responded by blaring their car horns. Also, I'm not sure if anybody here is involved with the Knights of Malta or is aware of them here in the United States and also abroad. But abroad, they have a bigger presence as medical providers. So our medical tent was staffed by the Knights of Malta, which go all the way back to the Middle Ages for caring for other pilgrims who are traveling to the Holy Land. On the second day, there is a Mass in the field, which you can see here on the left and right. Even though it's done very rustic, they do set up a tent and have a extremely reverent Mass. There's lots of polyphony and from French composers from the Renaissance as well during the Mass. They wear their traditional vestments, and the choir sings over the loudspeakers. And I also remember falling asleep in the sun. And here we have pictures from the last day. So you can see over here, you begin to see Chartres Cathedral about halfway through the second day, which starts to torture you because you think it's starting to get close, but you have another 50 or so miles you have to go because it's so flat. Then by the time you finally arrive on the third day, halfway through, it's only about 15 miles. The Mass there is equally as reverent as the other two, and it's honestly difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced something similar to it, where you are just suffering through immense pain throughout the entirety of it, to the point where the only reason I was able to continue going is because my friends were literally pushing me. And I explicitly remember after getting to the camp on the first day, just collapsing and not even being able to walk anymore. I had to crawl to get my things together for about half an hour until I could finally come to again. In the Middle Ages, it was very popular to depict the pilgrimage as an extension of life. So it had glorious highs, it had awful lows, but ultimately it was something that we could all experience together, and it was something to which we could look forward to, something glorious at the end, and for which God was present during its entirety. It was a very important moment for me to go and experience these things, as an American especially, because of how treasured they are to me. They're so far away, I don't see them every day. It's hundreds of years older than my own country even is, so it was an especially important experience for me. Pictures. Ultimately, I went on to spend a couple of more months in Europe, going on different trips down to Rome, for instance, during Holy Week. I was able to travel around Eastern Europe. But I need to explain to the people present today just how formative this experience was. It seems like it was a lot of fun, and it really was, but it taught me so much about myself. It taught me about how to interact with foreign cultures. It taught me what it's like to feel like a foreigner when you're standing there at midnight at a train station in Poland and people are babbling at you and you have no idea what they're saying and you're alone, don't know how to get back home. You learn a lot about yourself. I really encourage all the people here present to encourage their students, their friends, to try to learn a foreign language. It opened up an entire world to me, one that was not available to me before. I was able to speak with friends in their own language and learn things that I would not have had the opportunity to. And it's ultimately given me precious memories which I will cherish for the rest of my life.